The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to our session on customer experience management. Thanks for joining us today. We've got quite an eclectic mix of topics that we're going to go through today. We're going to start off by actually a little bit of an overview of the BP Group for those people who don't know who we are and what we do. And that's very short. And then we'll get into the main agenda. And our topics on the main agenda are going to be around this idea that business improvement isn't what it used to be. Some of the leading organizations, the ones we track, the ones we work with, are adopting a more direct and focused approach to actually getting better. And we'll talk about that. And we'll contrast that approach with some of the what are rapidly becoming redundant approaches from times gone by. We'll also talk about this idea that this shift isn't one of those fly-by-nights, here today, gone tomorrow type of ideas. It is fundamental, and those organizations who are realizing the benefits of it developing clear water between themselves and their competitors very rapidly. And we'll then get into a question and answer session. We'll be joined by one of my colleagues, the BP Group's Chief Customer Officer, James Dodkins. And we'll do a little bit of a Q&A around his book, which was launched last week, Foundations for Customer Centricity. And we'll talk about some of the themes in there and some of the ideas. And how those ideas are having a profound effect both in an immediate individual sense of people in organizations, but also at that sort of broader level across corporations and industries. And we'll finally close the session down with a look at some of the resources that you can access. And for all those folks who are attending the webinar, what we'll do is we'll send you a separate email which lists out the resources, how you can download e-copies of a couple of books and some additional resources in and around something we call the CEM method. So that's broadly. In terms of managing your expectations of time, about 30 to 40 minutes will cover off what we're going to be getting into. So in terms of BP Group, really this is for the benefit of those folks who've not come across us before. I know there's a number of people in on the call who are very familiar with us, so you can sort of relax for 30 seconds. We were established back in 1992 as a not-for-profit business club. Our sole intention back then was the transfer of knowledge and skills into organizations based on an exchange of information about leading what was at that time called best practice, but now we know that as next practice. In terms of footprint, it's around about 90,000 global members now, nearing 13,000 on LinkedIn as well. And within LinkedIn, there's a number of subgroups. Some of those subgroups are private groups for people who've attended certification or consultancy training. The training bit that we do is really not so much about training in a very prescriptive way. It's about a skills transfer. So our training is very focused around the situation that your organization is in or you as an individual are in, and then letting you acquire the necessary skills to actually be able to improve your business, your organizations, and your career. To that end, we have a number of different qualifications which range from certified process practitioner through professional, certified process professional master, and then the ultimate sort of qualification is the CPP champion. And that's somebody who can embrace all the different facets of being able to go through what we would refer to as customer experience management, sometimes previously known as advanced BPM. We also conduct research. So if we have any surplus in terms of profits at the end of the year, being a not-for-profit, we put those directly back into research. And with that in mind, we collaborate with some of those larger research organizations to understand, which way business is going, what are the latest developments, what are the ideas that are really substantive ideas, and what are those things that might just be fashion items. So that's a little bit of the background. In terms of who we work with, that's a very wide and broad spectrum. And if you try to look for sort of a common theme amongst these people, I suppose the common theme is that they've all got customers. So at the end of the day, we're all trying to align ourselves from a business point of view to actually deliver successful customer outcomes. And again, that doesn't matter whether you're a public sector, private sector, very large corporation, or corner shop operation. We're all trying to really clearly articulate what is the customer need and ensure that everything that we're doing is aligned to actually delivering that. So that's what these guys are getting up to, and some of those are noted names and making progress on the wider stage. To help deliver our services, our main office is in London, and we have a number of satellite offices around the planet. But our primary way of reaching out into the market is through our partnership network. So we have a number of accredited partners who are both trained and licensed in the use of the method. They also deliver accredited, certified training into their own respective geographies or verticals. So our coverage is quite broad, and as I say, it's our 23rd year this year, so it's not as though we're new to any of this process and performance stuff. We've been around the block a few times ourselves, and without exception, everybody who works for the BP Group is a practitioner. We're not academics or theorists, we're actually people who have been there and done it. Some of us have worked at the board level of very large corporations. Some are self-made individuals who've founded their own businesses and grown those businesses to be huge corporate successes. And some are relatively new to this whole sphere of change, but would be thought of as being the up-and-coming thought leaders who are helping us to redefine the way business gets done. So that's a little bit of the background. In terms of myself, I've written a number of books, been published a number of times. Anybody who reads me will certainly know I'm no Jeffrey Archer. However, I do try to put down in as eloquent a form as possible our understanding of the way the world's going. My last sort of major contribution was Outside in 2010. And when people pick that up, they very quickly say, well, it's a very big font, Steve, and it's got lots of pictures. And I say there's a very good reason for that. It's written primarily for CEOs, people with the attention span of a goldfish, who need to be able to understand an idea without getting bogged down in the technical detail of it. However, I've also written a number of technical journals, and I subscribe and participate in a number of forums across the planet, which are primarily coming out of original the process space, but over the last decade have very much more moved much more into the customer experience, customer expectation management space. Also, for those hardy souls out there who know me, you'll also know that I'm a qualified medical hypnotherapist, a master hypnotist, a neuro-linguistic programming practitioner and master, and also a Reiki master. So if things get really bad with the board of executives, I'm occasionally called on to use those hypnotherapy skills, which are quite useful sometimes. So that's a little bit about my sort of background. When we introduce James Dodkins, our CCO, he'll give us a little bit of his own background in due course. If you want to connect with me, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter as usual, as most of us are these days, and also got separate websites in addition to our own bpgroup.org website. So let's get to our agenda. The primary reason why we're here today is to discuss customer experience management and a method of applying that thinking in a way which allows our organizations to win the Triple Crown. When I say the Triple Crown, what I'm talking about is that ability to concurrently reduce costs, grow revenues, and enhance service. So that's one of the differentiators of this stuff, is that our measure of the success of it when we audit organizations doing it is, are you significantly moving against those three vectors simultaneously? It's not just cost reduction, it's not just service improvement, it's not just revenue and revenue growth. It's about the ability to do all those three things in tandem. Now, historically, of course, some of you will know I go back several decades. Historically, we might have thought of those three things being mutually exclusive. But one of the measures of customer experience management success is the ability to deliver those three things concurrently. Not every quarter, but certainly a significantly improvement against those elements over a period of time. We'll talk about some of the organizations who are precisely doing that. And more interestingly, perhaps some of those organizations who aren't, and some of the pitfalls that they face when their mindset really isn't sort of suited to this environment that we're finding ourselves in terms of second decade of 21st century. And then we'll get to this Q&A, as I've said, at the end of it with James Dodkins, and he'll give us a little bit more insight into the practical reality of implementing successfully customer experience management today, tomorrow, and next week. So why is the business world changing, and what's happening out there? Well, there's conferences all over the planet about the pervasiveness of the internet and the internet in everything these days. That's done very succinctly is given the customer power like never before. So instead of being consumers, we've actually become, as individuals, prosumers. And the organizations that we buy services from, and again, this includes both B2C and B2B businesses, in many instances have not reacted to that shift in the power base. They're still organizing themselves on a pyramidal hierarchical way of thinking where all processes go from the left to the right. And the customer is something of as an afterthought for many of these traditional organizations. And one of the main reasons for that is precisely the mindset. It's the way we think about the way we do work. And we've inherited a legacy way of thinking, which is, again, when we do this in the programs and we say to people, look, draw your organization structure, 95% of the time it's going to look like a pyramid. So with that one on screen, for instance, you can see the red blob under operations there. That individual or collective of individuals, that team might well say, I understand the customer, Steve. I get it. We're there. We're there on the page because, after all, we're customers ourselves. But hey ho, look at our organization structure and look at the way our processes work. And if you talk about the value chain, I'm 8 or 9 steps away from the customer to the left, and I'm 4 or 5 steps away to the right. So honestly, the customer isn't my job. I understand it, but it's not my day-to-day reality. The only reason the customer isn't everybody's job is because the way we draw the organization chart. Now, that might seem very simplistic, but the essence of it is very much that. We talk about customer-facing people. We talk about the back office. We talk about the trenches. Now, where have those analogies and metaphors come from? Well, they certainly haven't come from the 21st century, have they? They've come from an industrial age where everything was designed to look like a factory. Production line management theory and practice, industrial engineering, and all those other sort of things. And in fact, that just doesn't bound our existence as far as process is concerned. It bounds the very way we build our IT systems. They're all left to right, top to bottom, and very hierarchical and structured as if a process is just a set of inputs and activity and an output. A very mechanistic, Victorian way, if you like, of looking at the world. And one of the realities of that is that, of course, we have this idea of silo management and people being organized into these different silos. And for a couple of decades now, going back to the guys who are doing re-engineering, we've talked about knocking those silo walls down, destroying them, and cutting our processes through them so we can operate better and deliver better service and so on. But the simple reality is when we draw these organization structures, they don't physically exist. They're not real. They're a collective hallucination. And we're bounding ourselves by a drawing, by a representation system that should not be in the 21st century. It's about command and control. It's about authority, right? It isn't about getting the job done on behalf of the customer, right? And consequently, of course, can be very complex. It can be exceedingly costly to manage, right? It's very slow to change. And in fact, we'll talk about corporate culture change as being, oh, you don't know what it's like around here. We're like a big oil tanker and it's taking us years to change. Well, the certainty there is if you think of yourself like a big oil tanker, it will take you years to change. So one of the points we want to get across today is that the map is not the territory. The way we represent the world can completely change the way we operate within it. It's a complete mindset shift. It's not being bounded by those functional, specialist, hierarchical ways of thinking, which largely developed during the Victorian times and were enhanced with the industrial production line management principles of the 20th century. we see a massive difference between those organizations who are able to embrace the idea that if we do actually put the customer at the center of everything that we do and represent ourselves in that way, we won't be constrained by this hierarchical, functional, specialist design, which was never ever developed to deliver a successful customer outcome. It was developed to do production very well. So that sounds controversial, and it probably is to some people, but it is one of the things that differentiates those people who are doing this stuff successfully and those who aren't. So I thought we ought to cover that off for a moment or two and talk about there's those who do get it, those who can win the Triple Crown, simultaneously reduce costs, grow revenues, and enhance service. There's a bunch of people, a bunch of organizations who actually think they get it, and then there's those who definitely don't. So let's start with the latter, those who don't. Heads in the sand, they're just hoping that if they keep out of the way for long enough, all this change will go away and things will revert to normal. Well, as we've often heard recently, is change is the new normal. There is no going back to a status quo or a steady state. We're all involved in this dynamic now, which means that customers have become very fickle. They're not loyal anymore. And in fact, customers know more about our own products and services than we do, because they can do the research. They've got the time to find out specific what they want, right? So those organizations who don't get it, what they tend to focus on is everything looking like a factory, for instance. They're in the business of streamlining and reducing waste, because, of course, that's what you would do in a factory. And they also have this passion for asking customers what they want. Now, when we think of the irony of that, if you go and ask the customers what they want and they tell you, and then you go and develop a product and service around that information, then you will fail very quickly. And in fact, one of the recent postings was more fool you if you're doing that. This point was brought home to us a few years ago by Disney Corporation, who were explaining there's a profound difference between what customers say they need and what they actually want. And one of the ways they articulated that to us was, of course, most of us are parents or relatives of children. We certainly understand the concept of kids. If you ask the kids, what would you like for dinner? They will probably tell you pizzas with chocolate biscuits and different type of fruit sauces and things like that. Whereas as parents, we actually know what they need. Right? We wouldn't give them what they wanted. It's just not good for them. So why on earth do we invest so much energy and money from an organizational perspective in asking customers what they want? When, of course, they tell us, that creates an expectation, and then we go and deliver it, and by then the customer's moved on to something else. So those who don't get it have been engaged in a way of working and doing things which to a very large extent has become redundant in the 21st century. And I'm talking from the UK today. So I thought I would use a UK example. These are some of the retailers who've gone out of business in the last 3 or 4 years. They're now no longer there. And in fact, the high street has been decimated because of their inability to actually deliver successful customer outcomes. They lost the connection. They're so busy managing themselves and their hierarchies, spending an inordinate amount of money in terms of streamlining, removing waste, and doing other factory-based thinking that they lost the plot. So they've actually disappeared from the high street. There's also some others out there who still exist today, and some others who haven't. And we think about Kodak for a moment. They actually created the instant camera. They were the creators of the digital camera. And what on earth happened to Kodak? Yeah, that became their nemesis as well, giving the customer the ability to actually choose. Certainly wasn't on their agenda. They went and asked customers what they wanted. They built it, and then customers, of course, said, well, no, thank you. There's something better over there. Likewise, the Nokias, the Blackberries, the Motorolas. And even to that extent, what about the banks? We're all familiar with 4 or 5 years ago, the global financial crisis. And it's our contention that many of those organizations who had to change, who went out of business, who lost connectivity with the successful business, did so because precisely they didn't understand the changing customer need. How we say that is because there are many organizations, as many if not more, of the ones who failed who actually succeeded during the same time and have gone on to achieve even greater success. So in some of our sort of writings and literature, you'll see us talking about particular case studies where we talk about those organizations as well. Now, there's another bunch of people who actually think they get this stuff. They think they get customer experience management. And they'll talk about, yes, we're customer centric. But when you actually sort of dig down below the surface, what you find out is that they've gone and bought a customer centric piece of IT, and all of a sudden they now believe they've become customer centric. They'll talk about brand values, and the other sort of common denominator amongst them is they'll talk about you should exceed customer expectations. Well, the simple reality of that, of course, if you exceed expectations, is you reset the expectations. So that's the road to ruin. What you need to do is identify what the needs are, develop expectations around the needs that you can deliver, and then deliver successfully to those needs. In fact, you manage the expectation. You certainly don't want to be exceeding it, otherwise, you're resetting it all the time. There's also the other euphemisms in there, like the customer is king, and we like to think of that as it's all soft and fluffy stuff. It's not real, it's not hard. And if you're talking to a board of executives, their principal reality is shareholder value, driving out costs, improving revenue, enhancing service. If you're talking about those sort of things, then the soft and fluffy brigade, here today, gone tomorrow, they can put a good presentation together, but at the end of the day, it's not sustainable. And in fact, the truth is the customer experience is really not connected to business success. Now, along the way, they've adopted lots of approaches which are to do with trying to find out what customers want and whether customers are happy with the service. And I won't cut across something James is going to talk about a little bit later on, but ideally, you really know whether you're delivering successfully or not. You shouldn't have to be going out there retrospectively asking customers about whether you've done so. Now, there are those organisations who do get it, and we don't have time or space today to go into specific case studies and details, but here's just a few of those organisations who've significantly differentiated themselves from their competitors in their own respective industries in terms of how they're going about doing business. When we audit these guys, when we look at what they're doing that's different and then begin to incorporate some of their ideas into our sort of certification programs and our training sessions, what comes across more than anything else is the simplicity of it all. It's not overly complex. It doesn't require years to do anything in a meaningful way. The results can be obtained very quickly. And there's lots of case studies which we can talk about at another time and featured in some of our books and some of our literature. So if you're interested in that, again, drop us a line afterwards and we'll point you in the right direction. So we're reaching the point now where I'm going to introduce James in a few moments. But what I want to emphasize is that this shift in emphasis and the demarcation between those organizations achieving success and those who are falling by the wayside isn't a sort of a flash in the pan. It's not an here today, gone tomorrow thing. It is fundamental and it's permanent. Once you've realigned your mindset in and around this old concept of the customer is the center of our universe, and you begin to organize yourself on that basis, both through the processes, the IT systems, and so on, you will begin to make that shift. Now, of course, you may have people in and around you who say, oh, yeah, we're doing all that customer stuff. We're doing customer journey management. We're doing customer experience management in the way it used to be thought of and things like that. Well, part of our reality on that is over the last decade, we've seen two very different perspectives develop. One is the perspective which looks at precisely the customer, the journey the customer experiences. The other is the internal perspective, the hierarchy, the architecture, the way we do what we do, the IT systems. So the way we like to think about that sort of change and how we bring that sort of those perspectives together is this idea of the customer experience management of it being a single view of the customer. Not separate views, depending on your particular persuasion, whether you're in IT, whether you're in architecture, whether you're in process management or frontline management or sales or any of those silos, or in fact, whether you're on the customer side of the equation. It is actually one and the same thing. So what we like to talk about is this idea of, if you think of the duck as being total customer experience management, customer journey mapping, it's what's on the surface, it's what the customer sees. What's below the surface are things like process mapping, IT systems, architecture. It's what the organisation has to do to deliver the products. It's, if you like, it's the legs amongst the weeds going crazy, driving the duck across the surface. And what we see customer expectation and customer experience management has been is a single view of the customer. The method itself embraces that concept and that idea. So it's not peculiar in that it looks at process from just an internal perspective, and it's not peculiar in that it looks at process in terms of just an experience perspective. It's the total entity, it's the total duck, if you like. And again, the differentiator there for people doing customer experience management successfully is the winning of that triple crown: lower costs, higher revenues, and enhanced service simultaneously. Now, I thought this slide might sort of ruffle a few feathers, if you'll pardon the analogy with the duck. We were looking at sort of recently, a few weeks ago, at the trends in terms of what are people really interested in, where are people going on in terms of Google, and of course you can go on Google and do this sort of trends analysis and things like that. Now, as a sort of Six Sigma Master Black Belt, I'm the first to hold my hand up and sort of say is, yes, that's been very worthwhile. But a lot of the time, it really doesn't cut it as far as being able to deliver a successful customer experience, because its focus isn't on delivering successful customer outcomes. Its focus is on doing production line management better. So I think we see that overall in a sort of a trend in terms of thinking and practice for those organizations who are really achieving results. What they're saying is that, look, we have to take both perspectives, both the customer perspective and our internal perspective, harness them together, and that for us is customer experience management. Okay, so at this point now, what I would like to do is to talk about a little bit about what is actually developing here and now. Where do we go forward with this? How do we change things? How could things actually be sort of modelled going forward? And with that in mind, I want to introduce you to a colleague of mine, Mr. James Dodkins. He's our Chief Customer Officer at the BP Group, but he's also sort of warranted in a number of different spaces. And part of his articulation of this was to write a book about it. And in fact, that book was published the back end of last year. And we're going to have a little bit of talk from James on that very subject now. James, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thanks for that, Steve.
Okay. Would you like to give us a sort of just a brief overview of yourself for the benefit of those people who don't know you, and then we'll get into a sort of a Q&A session?
Yeah, sure thing. So my name's James Dodkins. I'm the CCO of the BP Group. A short run over of my background. I started my career in the HMCS Security Forces. Came out of that and started working with a company called HomeServe in the UK. HomeServe is an insurance company, and I helped grow HomeServe to be the fastest growing insurance company in UK history. And at HomeServe, we revolutionised the way that people did insurance in the UK, which I'm quite proud of doing. After that, I moved off and created my own company. Through my own company, I've worked with some of the biggest brands in the world. I own and run multiple other businesses as well, all the way from sort of applications that help children choose college courses through to online retail furniture. So quite eclectic, my past. Again, through the BP Group, I write articles, I help with the research, I help run the BP Group, I talk at conferences, I judge at conferences on behalf of the BP Group. And I suppose the last feather in my cap and the most recent feather in my cap is that I am now an author, which is something I never necessarily thought I would be, but that's sort of ended up happening. I suppose that's pretty much everything about me.
Okay, thanks for that, James. That's cool. I mean, you say you're not an author, but you've written a book and you've been published, and I can see from the sort of figures from that, from just over a few weeks, there's quite a lot of interest in that sort of publication. So, tell us a little bit about the book and what the messages you're trying to get across now.
Well, as you alluded to, Steve, basically every department that anybody's ever worked in, any system that anybody's ever used, any process that's ever existed, any process improvement methodology that's ever been used, every customer experience, every piece of work that has ever been done in business has been formed, controlled, and constrained by fundamentally what is a drawing of an idea that was conceived and created for a completely different age. This pyramid and the mindsets that it creates, that's the ecosystem that your customer experience lives within. So this book, it's really about asking yourself the question, are we really customer-centric? Are we truly customer-centric? In the book, it dispels many customer centricity myths, and it puts forward a new way of drawing the org chart to guarantee true customer-centric success.
So that's interesting in terms of guaranteeing customer-centric success, but there will be lots of people out there who are sort of saying, yeah, but this customer-centric thing isn't that new, is it? It's been around for quite a few years. So what's the difference here, and why foundations for customer centricity? What's the difference between what's gone before and what you're talking about?
It's a good question, really. The idea of customer centricity has been around for a while, and the idea of customer experience has now been around for a while. Now, in the past, people doing customer centricity and customer experience, it was quite a niche group. There was only a certain amount of people that were doing it in the world. So that if a company did want to become customer centric or start on their journey towards delivering fantastic customer experiences, there were a few people they could go to and find out. Now, what's happened is, because it's become a bit of a buzzword, because a lot of people have sort of jumped on the bandwagon, the idea of what customer centricity really is and how to deliver fantastic customer experience has become really diluted. So there's lots of people out there who, as you said earlier, think they are being customer centric, when in fact they're being probably the furthest thing away from customer centric possible. Now, what that does is it gives customer centricity a bad name. It gives customer experience a bad name. People go, oh yeah, I've tried that, but it doesn't work. Now, what the book will point out is, if you've tried customer centricity and customer experience improvement in the right way, you'll never think about business in the same way again. So the problem is, a lot of people think they're customer centric when in fact they're completely they're un-customer centric, let's say.
So how would you get, we meet CEOs and, boards of executives every other day. What's the key message there? What's the difference for them when they say, oh, I've done all that before, I've been there, done that, and it doesn't work? So what's the key message that you'd get across with that?
Well, the key message is, unless you change the foundation of your business to a customer-centric foundation, you aren't customer-centric. So there's many people that say, yeah, we've tried customer centricity, we've done this, we've done that. Unless you have actually changed your org chart to symbolize the customer and how you deliver success to the customer, you aren't customer-centric and you haven't tried it. It's kind of like, I use this analogy in the book, so I'll use it now. Buying a fish, okay? Now, you could do all the research possible. You could find the best fish seller in the world. You could travel to this fish seller. You could purchase the fish. You could pay top dollar for the fish. You could pay a lot of money because this is a pedigree fish. It's come from the best fish lineage there is. And you could transport the fish home. Waiting at home, you've got a fantastic fish tank. You've got all the foods, all the supplement, all the cleaning products. But if you then put them in the wrong type of water, they're going to die. And they'll die quickly. And that's kind of the problem at the moment. The key message here is that unless the water is conducive to delivering success, the fish is going to die. So it doesn't matter how well you've done customer experience improvement. If you then try and put that new experience or that new process into the wrong ecosystem, into the wrong environment, it's going to fail. And so I think that's really the key message from this.
So the key message there would be that people who look at their organisation through that lens of the pyramid and functional specialisms and hierarchy can't possibly succeed in, realistically with customer centricity, because by definition, they're not organised to do that. They need to rethink the way they structure themselves in order to be able to actually deliver on that success.
Exactly.
Good. How could, in terms of listeners, we're going to make the book available to the folks after this session, but in terms of the participants. How could you actually use it practically? I mean, where would you start? What would you do? Because that sounds like a big ask. You say to me, look, you've got to change the organisation structure. I go, oh my giddy aunt, if I could do that, I would have done that. But that is a real big ask. So, what practical things could we do to sort of get started on that?
Well, I think for a lot of people, maybe they haven't thought about changing the organisation structure. I think they assume that it exists. And again, as you alluded to at the beginning, people just take it as it is. It's never questioned, it's only obeyed. People think it is a physical structure. We refer to it as a pyramid, which is a physical structure. We talk about silo walls and having to break down silo walls. We talk about value chains and chains of command. We make it real. We make it into a real thing. And a lot of people, I think, just take it as a given and try and work in between these rigid structures that we've created for ourselves, when in fact, it's not real. It's not a real thing. All it is a drawing. So I don't think many people have actually looked at it like this before. So beginning to put things into practice, you can start small, even though this is a fundamental, massive shift in the way that companies are doing business at the moment. You can start small. You can start to make changes within your team or your department as it exists at the moment to try and sort of get those little wins so that people organically sort of grow their interest in what it is that you're doing. And people come to you and ask and say, whoa, how did you manage to do that? And of course you can tell them and it'll start to grow from there. I mean, in the book, there's many practical examples of questions you can ask yourself and you can ask your colleagues. Also, it's not just different questions you can ask, but making you look at the same questions in different ways and saying, oh, could we answer those questions in a different way? There's different ways to challenge and question your own mindsets and your colleagues' mindsets. And there's lots of very useful analogies in there as well to help you communicate the ideas to different people. So again, as I say, it's probably about reading the book and starting small. Start where you are. You don't have a choice.
One analogy that struck me, James, was thematically, the way you described how to organise a company and an organisation in a different way. And one of the metaphors you use there is football. Do you want to share that with us, just as, without taking anything away from that chapter, just that idea about, people playing in different roles in different positions?
Yeah. Well, it kind of goes back to the questions again. What questions do we need to ask? So one of the first questions when looking to improve anything is, who is the customer? Who is it that we're trying to make this process better for? Now, again, to go back to the pyramid idea, if you would say, oh, well, we've got internal customers, technically, internal customers don't exist. They're a construct of the mind. The only reason they exist is because of the way we draw the diagram. So we would pragmatically say, well, really, the only customers that exist are the people that receive your service. People refer to it as the end customer. So thinking of the end customer, who are they? Okay. And really defining that helps to set a direction that your improvement's going to go in. So we've defined who the customer is, and you ask yourself, what does success look like for this customer? In this experience, within this process at this time, what does success look like? Now, what we kind of need to do is think of ourselves like a football team, or for our American friends, a soccer team. Within a soccer team, we can ask ourselves those questions. Who is the customer? And again, we could probably, most of us would say, well, the fan, the person that comes to the game and watches the team play. They are the customer. Now, what does success look like to that customer? Well, it's the win. It's seeing the team win the game. So now we know who the customer is and the success that we are there to achieve for them. Now, what a soccer team does, which is different to what an organisation does, is they will put a team together of different specialisms who are best suited to deliver that customer success. They will put a team together who have got different skills, who are best suited to deliver the successful customer outcome, to deliver that win. Now, what we do in business is very different. What we do is we put people together and segregate them and separate them. So all the IT guys go together, all the marketing guys go together, all the compliance people go together. Nobody talks to each other. Nobody talks to compliance because nobody likes compliance. So everybody's, and it's almost as if they're battling against each other. Whereas in a soccer team, what we do is we put a team with different specialisms together who have one outcome in mind, and that outcome is the customer's success, to win the game. So that's really the biggest idea, and it's probably the biggest analogy in the book. Now, if you think about it, if you could think about, let's say, a defender could take a shot at goal. They could do something that's out of their core competency. They could take a shot at goal. They could score a goal. What they're not going to do is say, "Oh, that's not really my job. My job's to defend. So what I'll do is I'll pass it over to a striker." In real life, things are moving far too fast for you to have that luxury. And it's exactly the same in business. Customers are evolving at such a rate, and the world has become such a fast-paced environment that you don't have that luxury anymore. To deliver fantastic, laser-focused customer experience, you really need to understand who the customer is, what their success is, and put that team together who are able to deliver it and become multi-skilled and do whatever it takes to deliver that success. So, for instance, if you were a striker and you saw another striker was about to score a goal in the final of the World Cup and you knew that you could tackle them to stop it, you would not run over and say, "Oh, excuse me, you need to be tackled. I'm a striker. I'm not trained to do tackles. What you need to be tackled by a defender. So if you can just wait there on hold while I transfer you to the defender department," it wouldn't happen. Time is of the essence, and it is exactly the same in the business world. So what you've got to think is when you put together a team of different specialisms, of different skills, who have that one outcome in mind, delivering the win, delivering the successful customer outcome, they will all do whatever it takes to make that happen. And the last point of it is tying their reward system to that. Tying the reward system to the delivery of customer success. Because again, it's all well and good changing all these structures, changing everything and getting them all to behave in different ways. And then saying, "Yeah, but we're only going to pay you for making tackles, or we're only going to pay you for taking shots at goal." It's not about that anymore. The reward system has to change in line with the delivery of the successful customer outcome. And when you get a group of people working together to deliver success because that's what they're rewarded for, you do business in a very different way. And that is the first step to becoming truly customer-centric.
That's great, James. I mean, that's I did like the analogy. There's some other analogies and metaphors in the book. There's one area which is particularly enlightening, and it's around customer surveys and not the need for them. And I was taken by your metaphor, the football metaphor there. The fan knows whether the team's been successful there and then. They don't need to be responding to a questionnaire 2 weeks after the event, do they? So, why would you do that? Send a fan a survey 2 weeks afterwards and say, "How do you think we performed?" Well, you've either won the game or you haven't. That's it. End of story.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for that, James.
But that's the point. If you know what success looks like to your customer and you know the things that will deliver it, you don't need to go and get feedback from the customer because you will know whether you've delivered that or not. You will know whether you've done the things that have achieved customer success. And again, the point of this is, in a football team, you don't just set out a strategy and leave it exactly the same for the entire match, lose the game and say, "Oh, maybe we should do things different next time." You'll change things as you go in order to deliver that success. But in business, you can't do that if you don't know what that successful outcome is. It's about having one large target that everybody's trying to hit, rather than lots of little tiny targets that everyone else is trying to hit disparately. It's about having that collective target that everyone is trying to achieve. And once you've got that one large collective target, people start to do things in a different way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, certainly. And I think just touching on that successful customer outcomes, there'll be some people chomping at the bit there wanting to get the teeth into that, is that whole idea of, one of the techniques within the method, it's just one of the 42 techniques, is the successful customer outcome revolution, which can really help people to articulate needs. And again, working in the sort of sporting arena, and seeing how they do that and how direct they are in terms of understanding what the needs of the customer are, is really quite different to a lot of those organisations who failed and disappeared. That was one of the things they actually lost, if they ever had it, was that connection with what a successful customer outcome looks like. So I think you'd agree with me, James, it's very accessible. Just one last question I want to ask you is, where do you see this whole arena of customer centricity going? If we were able to jump into our time machines now and go sort of 5-10 years out from now, what's that landscape going to look like? Any ideas on that you can share?
Well, I mean, honestly, I do think it's dependent on how the world shapes up. It's again with many of the sort of management methodologies and process improvement methodologies that have gone in the past. They've been created for a specific age, used the same way for 20, 25 years, and then people wonder why they stop being effective because they weren't designed for the right age. So without actually being able to see into the future, it is hard for me to say where I think customer centricity will go. However, it needs to start moving away from process standardization and moving towards experience personalization. I think, give it time, people will stop talking in the terms of process because, of course, as we know, process, the way we traditionally look at it, is just a tiny little part of the entire customer experience. I think what will happen is people will start to only really talk in terms of customer experiences and have customer experience teams that deliver that success dependent on what the experience is. So I think we'll be moving away from process standardization and towards experience personalization. I think we'll be able to understand customers more and more. The way technology is changing, we're going to start to be able to preempt their preferences, preempt their needs. And again, one of the things we pick up in the book is if you need to offer your customers options, it just shows them that you don't know what they need. Now, I think we're probably a long time away from an entirely optionless environment, but I think we're going to get closer. I think it's going to get to the point where companies are going to give us less and less options because they already know what it is that we need, which I think will be a really neat place to be, and that's going to be one of the biggest seismic shifts. And of course, I think technology is going to play a big part in that. So technology used in the right way is really going to help that. And again, I think we're going to move away from department thinking. I think give it 10 years, departments won't exist anymore. There won't be departments. All there will be is different sets of people who are there to deliver customer experience. That's all there'll be. Now, whether that happens or not, I don't know. I would like to know. But that's how I see the future shaping up.
Yeah, I think those organisations, that we're aware of, some of the automotive companies and that sort of thing, are actually sort of living, eating and breathing this stuff. They're already way ahead of the pack, and we see them mentioned every day in terms of, they're exceeding their profitability targets, their revenues are growing, the customer satisfaction is improving. And yet to some people that still seems like magic. Whereas I think one of the nice things about your book is that it very simply presents that idea in a way that's accessible to everybody. It's not written in an overly technical way. People can embrace the ideas, whether they're at the C level or whether they're just, their second day in work. It's easy to understand. So enough of the sort of publicising your sort of fame and fortune there, but I would definitely recommend the book. I think one of the things I liked about it as well is you mentioned this to me a few weeks ago, James. You should be able to read it in an airline flight, 2 or 3 hours. And that's precisely what I did. I managed to read it within a flight. So it certainly wasn't something that I had to keep coming back to and try to get my head around. It made sense, straight out the traps. So thanks very much for that. Okay. Thank you, James. Thanks for that sort of input. So in terms of how do you get your hands on this, well, what we'll do is we'll follow through with all the folks who've attended the session, and you'll receive an email, and what we'll do is give you access to the downloadable version both of James's book and the one that preceded this from the BP Group's perspective back in 2010, Outside In, which was some of the genesis of the ideas, but it was also putting out there a few sort of radical thoughts back then, which now have just become commonplace, and you say, well, that's the way you would do business, isn't it? That's the way Amazon do it, isn't it? That's just the way it happens. And it's amazing how quickly we've integrated those things into our lives. So we'll give you access to those resources along the way as well. As this session was titled Customer Experience Management Method, some of you will want to get your hands on that. So what we've got is some video resources and the various resources that are in the public domain that you can download, access, and actually begin to play with the toolkit, as it were. So that will follow on. In terms of the method itself, again, trying to be as simple about this as possible, it fits together like a jigsaw. As we know, the world isn't necessarily left to right and pyramidal. It's about fitting the pieces together as and when you need them. I've already mentioned there's 42 different sort of techniques in there. Those techniques lend themselves to different situations. So there's a whole bunch of acronyms that you can see on the screen there. They're all explained in the glossary that you'll receive as well. And hopefully you'll try a few of these things out. You may also sort of beat a path to our door and meet us at conferences in both the US, Australia, Singapore, and Europe over the next few weeks and months. And by all means, attend some of those sessions and share with your colleagues, because again, that's what we're about, is this exchange of information, this exchange and the ability to be able to learn very quickly from each other. So thank you very much for attending the session. I hope it has been worthwhile for you. You've seen our email contacts, but if you do want to get in touch with me, just as a reminder, steve.towers@bpgroup.org, at Stowers on Twitter. James is at J.Dodkins on Twitter. And come and have a look what we're talking about and who we're meeting and who we're going to talk to next. So thanks very much for your attendance. Goodbye. Have a great day.